Hi everyone, I'm Jay, and today I want to talk about connectives. When you are going from one point to the next in a speech, it's necessary to take a moment to psychically pause so the audience can catch up before you launch into that next point. I will talk about four types of connectives: transitions, internal previews, internal summaries, and signposts. One type of connective is called a transition. A transition is a one-sentence statement after the ending of the previous point and before the beginning of the next main point. It could be something as simple as saying, "Now that I've talked about my first main point, that leads us into my second main point." That sentence would count as a very basic transition. You can get more ornate and flowery with transitions as well. A lot of times, when you finish your main point number one, that will raise questions naturally in the audience's mind, and you can draw attention to those. You could say something like the following. Now, based on what I've said so far, you may be wondering X, Y, and Z. Let's address each of those questions in turn. This example goes beyond a basic transition and is called an internal preview because it previews what is coming up in the next several sections of the speech. Remember, speakers always preview all main points in the introduction of the speech, but by the time you've reached the middle of the speech body, people might have forgotten what you said in the intro. This is why internal previews can be useful. Similarly, when you get to the end of a main point, it can sometimes be useful to include an internal summary before transitioning to the next point. An internal summary is a one-sentence connective that reviews the subpoints of the point you just finished. Alright, we've talked about transitions, internal summaries, and previews. Next up, let's talk about signposts. Signposts are also important. A signpost is a word like first, second, third, next, and so on. Any word that signals to the audience what's coming up next in relation to what was just said. These things are so important. I love signpost words, and I encourage you to sprinkle them all throughout your speech. The audience wants to stay with you, but despite their best efforts, they might zone out for a moment, or they might get confused or disoriented. Remember, listeners don't have your speech printed out so we can follow along. Speeches are an oral medium, so help your listeners out by reminding us frequently where we are in the speech. The point here is to be audience-centered. For class speeches, at least 2 transition statements are required total. One between main points 1 and 2, and another between main points 2 and 3. Again, the overall term for what we're talking about here is connectives. This includes transitions between main points, signposts throughout the speech, and internal previews and summaries where appropriate. Think of connectives as the shock absorbers of the speech, or the brakes of a speech. If you're driving a car on a windy road and you try to take a turn without slowing down, you're going to plow right off the road. In the same way, if you jump from one point to the next, without signaling to the audience and slowing down a little bit, then you're going to lose the audience when you make that transition. In review, in this video, we've talked about connectives. Transitions are required between main points. Signposts, like firstly, secondly, and so on, are always welcome. And internal previews and summaries can help audiences stay on track, especially if the main points are beefy. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for listening, and happy speaking.